Hello, thank you. Can everybody hear me? This time on purpose. All right, thank you very much. Thank you for the organizers. Probably I would like to join my voice, but this time informally, to the acknowledgement of country and pay my respects to traditional owners in the room and leaders past, present and emerging. Also want to extend my apologies for not having my microphone on mute this morning, and hopefully you could enjoy the welcome to country this time without a French accent overlaying the didgeridoo. Thank you very much for having me today. So as Noah mentioned, I no longer work with natural carbon, but I've stepped in today to give the presentation that Julien was going to give. Darryl is today up in Irocoons to assist APN Cape York with the transition of the carbon project following the passing of the general manager there. So I will try and step in his shoes and deliver that chat for him. If I can share my screen. Sorry, it's a bit slow. All right. So this presentation has been the same over the last few years. What we like to do is give a bit of a spotlight on the activities the years just passed. In the way we go about this, we're trying to analyze the results to show the impact of management intent on the result of carbon projects. And I think Cape York is a bit different from the other places in so far that the properties are very different, owned by different type of or managed by different type of groups, and probably on a smaller scale than some of the other projects. So you can really see the difference between management intent, depending whether they're pastoral, conservation, indigenous groups, or projects that haven't started. And that's the analysis we run every year. So these are all the projects on Cape York that we're trying to classify in different colors, and probably as a background also have a look at the vegetation map on Cape York, and you can see that there's clearly a spine of areas where the vegetation is eligible, and there's quite large tracts of ineligible vegetation in the work that we do. This attracts some pretty interesting results when it comes to strategy for burning, because you can do quite a lot to manage your fires by working with the ineligible vegetation. In particular, T3 country in late season fires don't have a carbon impact, so there's something that interests people, being able to do storm burns in some part of the region and without impacting the carbon projects. So the first group of participants, about 35% of the eligible Cape York projects, they're pastoral leasing. They currently, we've tried to set it up between non-Indigenous owned lease and Indigenous owned leases. So this one you're looking at is a non-Indigenous leases, and essentially the driver there is to conserve grass for growing cattle. Second one is a couple of projects that haven't started. We should probably update that map next year, because the bottom two are definitely not going to go ahead. And it's still a very small proportion of the study area. To a large extent, the feasible projects in Cape York have been developed or at least explored. The largest or the strongest contribution on Cape York is, of course, Indigenous projects. A whole bunch of them that are working jointly with national parks and other pastoral leases, and half of them about that we service and we help from a carbon accounting point of view. This map here excludes the joint management areas, so really looking at areas that are entirely managed by Indigenous groups. And then finally, the conservation estate on Cape York, which is quite large, and I would say about half of that is joint management between parks and Indigenous groups. So really the footprint of Indigenous projects is probably a bit bigger than that red map, but we thought it was interesting to look at those four different type of projects on the Cape. So together, Cape York still quite a large projects, but probably I think about 40 different projects, so very fragmented, covering quite a large part of the country. Maybe before I jump into the results for the year, one thing that was definitely a highlight or I suppose an important part of this year was COVID restrictions. So in Cape York, a lot of the resources comes from Cairns, and what we had halfway through last year was restriction of access to communities and to large parts of Cape York. So it's been extremely difficult for our projects to get organized and to undertake the burns that they wanted to undertake. Especially, I'd say this year, there was a lot more aerial burning than we would have liked. And a lot more within the aerial burning, a lot more fixed wing operations by opposition to chopper operations. That said, the project still found ways to deliver the burns. Maybe not always with the appropriate people or the people that were originally planned for, but managed to put some scars in the ground. And I guess my message here for the groups is, from a carbon accounting perspective, the very first test you have to meet is whether you have the legal right to undertake your projects. And that includes all permits and regulations that underpin the activities. And the activities in that case are about going out on country and burning. So this year, would like to remind everyone, as you push out your reports in the next couple of weeks, that the regulator would absolutely look at whether you had the legal right to undertake the activities and whether you therefore had the right COVID permits and entry passes and so on as you delivered the activities. Now, I don't know about the other jurisdiction, but for Cape York, those rules change every 10 days. We have a collection of permits and entry passes and a different set of rules, and only reporting on that and keeping track of that will be quite interesting. But really the message for this year is that entry pass, that proof or that policy you had to follow the COVID restriction will be just as important as your usual fire permit. So, something to remind us all of as we write through the report. And of course, it's just not good enough to have a copy of the pass, but you also need to have the evidence behind it to show that you had a COVID-safe plan in place and people actually followed it. So, the importance of record keeping on things that we usually don't spend too much time on. Administrative things will be quite important this year if you want to avoid delays in getting your accus. Next slide is probably something similar to what we've seen this morning, just a kind of an overview of where the fires have been. So those first one in blue were kind of January burns, had a kind of average start of the wet. Then people got to work despite COVID in June. And over the second half of the year, really the story is a couple of pockets that really were hammered by the inability of coming up on country early because of COVID and putting in all the burns that they wanted to. So you have a couple of projects that got absolutely annihilated. But then the projects that did manage to get up and put the burns in had, quite a good result. So a bit touch and go. I think it's pretty clear from this map where the good results were and where people didn't have as much luck. Now, how do I move on? So going back to the analysis that we present every year. So this is the baseline period where probably of interest here, you would see that before carbon projects were a thing, about 50% of the Indigenous estate used to burn late, and 30% of the conservation estate used to be late, and 40% of pastoral estates. So in aggregate, we had lots of late fires, and definitely during the project periods, then we moved in the right direction, right? So the proportion of late fires has come right down as we introduce more and more early fires in the landscape. So that's good. The method works. That's what we want. Now, probably one thing that we start looking at is if you look at these EDS numbers before project and then after, you can see that there's quite a big increase in the surface covered by early dry fires. And I think especially last year, this is a reflection of the heavy reliance we have on aerial burns. We probably think there is a way to put in enough fires in landscape, but maybe with more patchiness. And so maybe find a way to drive more revenue from those projects by essentially having the same footprint, but maybe a lighter footprint by not having those fires that travel for as long. So really encourage people to get on the ground and put the fires in directly when they can afford it. And probably the second part in Cape York is we could do a better job at fighting fires in late season. You'll see in the curves that come through. I think we've become pretty good at excluding fire in August and September, but comes the later part of the year, November, December, it still gets quite scary, and we don't really have the infrastructure in place to fight those fires. So really, as every year, calling on regional collaboration to make that happen. And probably, well, I'm seeing Paige here on the panel, we're hoping an investment from the state government in the Land Restoration Fund will throw the seeds of that regional collaboration to really try and drive more benefits for all. So those are the M curves, as Darwin likes to call them. I think it's pretty clear that they show that the result that we're getting is what we want. We can see a clear shift of fires towards the month of July, with a net decrease in August, September, and then a couple of odd years, where we still get some late fires in October, November that we should really learn how to control. So that's for the pastoral estate. Quite often they have a bit of an advantage being on the ridge, so they can take advantage of earlier curing rates. The project haven't started, definitely dominated by late fires still, so they could benefit from getting to the scheme. The Indigenous estate, so that's the bit that I wanted to highlight. We are definitely seeing this shifting in seasonality. We're not yet seeing a shift in total fire extent, right? So what we've done is replaced late fires with early fires, great, but can we do something to also reduce the total extent? Is it possible? Would the landscape allow it? These things need to be looked at. And of course, those couple of years are a bit old now. The two peaks you see in the late fires, they're 2013 and 2016, but it still shows some vulnerability to October, November fires. And again, definitely some investment in firefighting and regional coordination would be really useful for those projects. Conservation estates, a bit of the same story, but probably they've started the sort of fires a bit earlier, and so they have not as a sharp focus on the curves. So overall together, we're starting to see that M curve develop. We'll have a lot of work to do to tackle late fires, but also find ways to allow storm burns to happen within carbon projects, because some part of the country need it. Find ways to maybe introduce more patchy fires in the early season, and find ways to fight fires in late season. Now, all of that has been done in other places, but we call on collaboration essentially to make that happen. Maybe one last thing, the uptake of the 2018 sequestration method in Cape York is extremely low. We collectively, the industry sees that as more of a risk than an opportunity. There's a bunch of reasons for that, but one of the main one has to be that it is more of a trade-off than a net benefit to get involved in the sequestration method for Cape York project. And therefore, it's a much more complicated conversation when you're committing your ranger groups for a 25-year program for no clear additional benefits. That's what been exercising people's mind. So we'll be hearing later in a conference about what could be done to fix the methodology and make it more attractive. So that would be something to work on together. But that's it for 2020 on Cape York. And thank you again for having us today and our thoughts with APN Cape York today.
Thank you very much, Julien. Next up, our next speaker is Alex Debono from the Cape York Natural Resource Management. So Alex started work as a fire coordinator with the Cape York NRM in November 2020. He worked in natural resource management for over 20 years prior to his employment for the Cape York NRM. Over the last 4 years of that time in fire management in West Arnhem Land in the Northern Territory and the Kimberley region of Western Australia. Alex has worked with a range of landholders, including Indigenous owners on public land and the private conservation estates, and is keen to help develop effective fire management partnerships across the Cape York. Thank you for your time today, Alex.
Here we go. Yeah, so thanks for that introduction. Today I'm coming to you from Udingi country on the Atherton Tablelands in Northern Queensland, and I'll just be talking about Cape York Natural Resource Management's current projects and some future directions. Just get the presentation up. Okay. Yeah, as Nova said, I started here in November. Previously, I worked with Wadikan Land Management in Arnhem Land for about 3 years and did a little bit of work with a season of fire suppression with AWC in the northwest of WA as well. I'm obviously, as I said, new to the organisation here, so most of what I will speak about will build on what other people within the organisation have started, and it also takes on board and presents ideas shared by other fire practitioners across the Cape. Appropriate fire management has been long recognised by Cape York NRM in their natural resource management plan. We roughly break down our activities into 4 different areas, and they're funded by a number of sources, number of projects. The first area, supporting partnerships in carbon projects. Currently, we are funded by a Queensland Government Land Restoration Fund pilot project to look at aggregating smaller properties within the Normanby Basin, which is just inland of Cooktown. Due to a number of factors, carbon projects on the Cape are not always viable on an individual property basis, primarily because of the smaller size of properties, but also the fire history, as you can see from this fire frequency map. The fire history is not too bad, so it just means the baselines are lower, which means that the projects are less lucrative. And one way to address this is through aggregation. So multiple property owners, instead of running their own projects, will join together as a single project. This makes them more viable by saving things like audit and admin costs, and it makes sharing equipment and chopper time and coordination a bit easier. The current LRF project run by the Queensland Government also has an extra component, the co-benefits component, and this will provide additional funds to fire management projects if they can demonstrate that their projects deliver other co-benefits, for example, cultural co-benefits or biodiversity co-benefits. This current pilot project looks to support landowners to quantify some of their core benefits, particularly in the area of cultural burning, and quantify them and present them and hopefully get an LRF project up. Yeah, there's a number of ways to do this, which I won't go into. The next aspect of Cape York NRM's fire management activities is supporting fire management for biodiversity outcomes. Currently, there is a regional land care program called Biodiversity Bright Spots, Rainforest and Woodland. And one element of this is it aims to support land managers to use fire management to protect threatened species and their habitat. Most of the fire-related activities to date under this project have been around the golden-shouldered parrot, but there are options to support threat abatement activities that impact on cassowary habitat, and also littoral rainforest and coastal vine thickets. The Woodlands Golden Shouldered Parrot project is focused on supporting Indigenous rangers and traditional owners to implement culturally appropriate fire regimes which improve golden shoulder parrot habitat. This includes things such as storm burning, and this helps manage some of the woody thickening of Melaleuca species around the termite mounds where the golden shoulder parrot nests. The next major aspect of Cape York NRM's fire management activities is supporting sub-regional planning and coordination. This space has a long way to go. It's been identified by a number of fire practitioners in the region as something that is lacking, and it's something that Cape York NRM has been doing work towards, but it certainly needs more work. Currently, it's the work that has been happening has been funded by a number of sources. And the idea of breaking the Cape down into sub-regions, it's just a practicality. It means any coordination meetings have a more reasonable number of people present. It also means people don't have to travel as far to get to coordination meetings. This image of the map just shows a rough idea of how we might break the Cape down into a northern, central and southern fire management regions. There's already been work undertaken for the last few years in the southern region, and this is mostly run by Andy Hartwig from Cape York NRM. He accesses funding from a number of sources through Healthy Farming Futures, Reef Trust 7, and Indigenous Land and Sea Program grant. Andy works with pastoral as well as Indigenous landowners to deliver coordinated early dry season burning through the southern Cape York region. The image on the left, it was just an interesting upside of COVID last year. This shows the major access road to the Cape, the Peninsula Development Road. And last year, Andy was able to run an incendiary run straight up the side of the highway, which wasn't usually something you could do. So COVID did have some upsides. The northern region, last year, Cape York NRM facilitated a regional coordination meeting, and that was sort of the area from Weipa to the east, to the coast. Some EDS burns were also funded, and these were targeted at properties that didn't have existing carbon projects, but it helped to contribute to the broader fire management by closing some gaps and providing a bit more of a strategic approach in that part of the world. Cape York NRM has also recently commenced a new project funded through Reef Trust 7 catchments to coral. This will enable the expansion of further fire management coordination, focusing on the eastern Cape York catchments, as well as coordination. Some on-ground support can be provided, and again, this will be targeted at properties who don't have an existing capacity or resourcing through existing carbon projects. The work that this might focus on is identifying hotspots within regions, and by hotspots I mean areas that are common sources of late season dry fire, and focusing in on those areas to ensure that any early dry season burning is as complete as it can be to help reduce those late season fires. And also the other major area is addressing capacity gaps for fire managers. This could be providing and facilitating targeted training. So, for example, here in the bottom right, bombardier certification for different ranger groups and land managers, so they can undertake EDS burns. Also, coordinating the use of mapping tools such as the fine scale mapping, so people can have access to that information to assist their fire management programs, but also funding for healthy country plans. So for groups who are new in the space, supporting the development of their healthy country plans so that they can ensure that they have a good basis for any fire management that they do proceed with. The final area of major activity for Cape York NRM is around engagement and awareness. And a major part of this is the Cape York Regional Fire Forums. There was one held in 2017, 2019, and hopefully again we'll be running one later this year. The aim of these forums is to improve collaborations and networks between all Cape York fire managers. In 2019, Cape York NRM partnered with the Nature Conservancy, and about 100 people attended the forum, and that included pastoralists, Aboriginal ranger groups, private sector conservation areas, state government agencies, and carbon farming service providers. We have ongoing funding at this stage to run these forums for at least another 2 years. The Indigenous Fire Management Network has also been something that's been going for a while. This is funded through a regional land partnerships program. This network aims to build capacity and provide opportunities for Indigenous fire practitioners to network and exchange their knowledge. The next step in developing this network is to better understand the barriers and the needs of Indigenous fire practitioners on the Cape, and try to coordinate some training opportunities. Another awareness and engagement program run by Cape York NRM is the Arson Awareness Program. This was a direct outcome of the 2019 Fire Forum, and it was identified as something important by all the stakeholders present. And something that Cape York NRM facilitated with Queensland Police and Fire Emergency Services. Finally, just to touch on future direction for Cape York NRM in fire management. As has been already mentioned, continuing to assist stakeholders in understanding the carbon market. This is so they can be involved in it in a more informed way. And this includes working with both pastoral properties and Indigenous traditional owners and ranger groups. And also looking at ways to assist any of these groups to operate carbon projects collectively, as previously was mentioned with the Normandy aggregation project. Also, an important aspect is ensuring that fire coordination across Cape York balances the protection of carbon, biodiversity and cultural assets. Different landowners often have differing objectives for their fire management, so it's important to Cape York NRM to find ways to support all land managers so they can work together to meet their respective objectives. Also something that Cape York NRM has been involved with and will continue to be involved with, as I'm sure many groups here today, and that's ongoing advocacy for things like the continuation of NAFI and broader problems and issues and challenges that will face all fire practitioners, such as ensuring insurances and things like that remain affordable and keeps the projects viable. And just a final point, Cape York NRM will attempt to address the lack of science to establish a link between fire management and water quality issues that affect the Great Barrier Reef. The major reason why this is important is that a lot of funding around natural resource management in far north Queensland, or northern Queensland in general, tends to be tied back to reef water quality. And although the links between fire, erosion and water quality seem obvious, there's currently no existing science to quantify or back that up. So something that Cape York NRM hopes to support and contribute to. Yeah, just on closing, my contact details are there. If anyone wishes to get in touch, please feel free to do so. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Alex, for your presentation. And just a reminder to all the delegates, should questions arise, get them through to us because we'll go straight to questions after our next speaker. So on to our next speaker now is Paige Perry from the Queensland Government Land Restoration Fund. Paige Perry is currently the Policy and Governance Manager for the Queensland Government's Land Restoration Fund team. She's been with the LRF since 2018, handling a variety of roles, including a project to develop a template for the Indigenous land use agreements for carbon farming and the design and rollout of the first investment round. So over to you, Paige.
All right, thank you for that introduction. And I will also start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all gathering today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. For me, I'm joining from Brisbane on Turrbal and Yugara country. And let me just take a second here to find my screen. Go. All right. All right, so yes, as mentioned, I am a manager with the Queensland Government Land Restoration Fund, and hopefully, I know it's been mentioned already a few times earlier today, so this will hopefully give a bit of background on that program and how we fit into all of this. I will start with a bit of background for those that don't know. Essentially, the Land Restoration Fund has a few objectives that have been reasonably publicly stated. The Queensland government has given us a pretty broad mandate to work across the spectrum of the carbon farming industry, from research and development and innovation on the one side, which is run through the Queensland Department of Environment and Science, and then the commercial arm, which is probably a bit more public facing, and that's the entity that runs the investment rounds. And recently concluded a $100 million offering to the market. So I will get into the details of that, which is probably of most interest, but just wanted to cover a bit of background. For those that aren't familiar, the LRF does piggyback off of the Commonwealth system. We build on top of the general ACCU scheme, and we ask for projects that can deliver ACCUs and also will demonstrate and track the benefits additional to the carbon, which we call the LRF co-benefits, and that is a specific sort of subset of benefits that can come from carbon farming projects. When we talk about co-benefits, we're specifically talking across three categories: environmental, social, and economic. There's some examples there, but the details of our co-benefits that we acknowledge and recognize and expect projects to track can be found in our LRF co-benefits standard. And that's sort of the key document for understanding how to claim those additional benefits that come from a carbon farming project when you want to submit to the LRF. And as mentioned by Alex and potentially others, we did run some pilot projects as well that have tested some of these methodologies. And as those projects sort of wrap up, we do hope to provide more information on the outcomes from all of those projects as well. I have here also sort of an overview of what the LRF's perspective on sort of the North Queensland opportunities around carbon farming, the different sort of context for it, the strengths and challenges of projects in that area. I think for this group, probably of most interest are the two Savannah burning methods. And I will note a bit further on that both of these methods have been employed in LRF projects from the first round, and they both are eligible. Although we did have, and probably will continue to have, a requirement that the projects be new. And although I will say that if switching from emissions avoidance to avoidance and sequestration and avoidance also does count in terms of making that switch. So as Julien was mentioning earlier, there are some challenges with that method that we're aware of, and LRF is sort of one way we're trying to encourage some uptake of that method by paying a bit more for the credits because of the other benefits that may come from those projects. Round one, I will say first up that all of the projects from round one are listed on the LRF website, and there are full details available there, but I did sort of want to present an overview of that. We did have 18 projects that have contracted as of the 31st of December. It represents a total investment of around $91 million, and the projects themselves cover up to 1.8 million hectares all across Queensland. As you can see from the map, we had a reasonable geographic spread and a nice move towards the East Coast, which is part of what the LRF was aiming for as well with this project. A range of different methods, some projects using multiple methods, I will note, but there were 8 individual methods across the projects, and the contracted projects have claimed co-benefits from all available 12 co-benefit classes, which are stated again in the LRF co-benefit standard. You'll note that there are 6 projects sort of in that far north Queensland area, and I will go into a little bit of detail about 2 of them in particular. The first one is the Central Cape York Regional Savannah Fire Project. This one is using the sequestration and avoidance method. It is a 15-year project for $28.85 million, and that's a collaboration between Queensland and ILSC, and it's aiming to manage almost 1 million hectares of Cape York Peninsula, and will hopefully be a good demonstration of how to show the extra benefits, including Indigenous, environmental, and social economic co-benefits that come from these projects. The other one is the Northern Irocoons Savannah Burning Project, which is employing both of the Savannah burning methods across the project. This one's also a 15-year project for $8.49 million. Again, similar to demonstrating the traditional burning techniques and cultural preservation and building some skills in the region. The remaining other projects used a variety of other methods, including reforestation and afforestation. And again, all of those details are available on the website. So I won't go into detail here, but I'm happy to answer any questions for those that are interested during the Q&A.
Thank you, Paige, for your presentation. So we've got a few questions that have been asked. And the first couple I'll throw to you, Julien, first. What's been the impact of COVID on fire management up in the Cape York?
Well, look, I don't know about the whole of Cape York, right? But I can give you some of the experiences that we've seen. I guess the very first thing would be made it extremely difficult for this handing over of knowledge. I think this year has been all about getting some kind of a job done to create carbon credits. And there wasn't as much of those cultural walks and on-ground fire as we would have liked. That's probably the first, I suppose, first impact. Second impact, as I was saying before, is a lot more aerial burns, which meant probably more fires in the landscape that we would have needed. But also, fire breaks are probably not as tight. So we've seen a couple of places that did manage to put their breaks in, but still late in season, the fires managed to sneak through and take up that property. So, you know, it was a tough year from a kind of planning and execution point of view. And really, I think what really played on people's mind was the constant changing of rules, right? And you know, the ability or not to bring resources and people across from Cairns would have been the biggest impact.
Thank you. There's another question just off the back of that one as well, Julien. I mean, we're always looking to do things better. that taps onto the next question. How do we go about improving fire management up in the Cape?
I'm the bean counter here, who tells you what your fire management does in terms of carbon. So I'm not sure I'm well qualified to, give an opinion on how you improve fire management. But what I can see in the results is, there's potential to be more on the ground, for more on the ground early burns, and a dedicated task force, if you want, or intervention task force to come and fight fires later in the year. So it would be the two main things that would benefit those carbon projects. But I think, and that's probably where the work of Cape York NRM and LRF is good, is, well, the fact that you can maximize your carbon credits in that way may not be what people want to be doing, right? And I think on Cape York we see a lot of misinformation about how carbon projects work, and some very black and white approaches to these things. And I think a bit more nuance would be helpful.
Thank you for that. Alex, there's a question for you. What's the greatest fire management challenge you believe up in Cape York Peninsula? Alex?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. So the biggest challenge would definitely probably have to be the complexity of the land tenure issues. Lots of different stakeholders with relatively small properties. And they often, as I've sort of touched on, have different fire management objectives, whether they be managing their pastoral resource or biodiversity objectives, or protection of cultural assets. Look, Cape York NRM has worked with, or does work with, a range of those stakeholders. So I think it just takes a bit of time, and just getting everyone together to discuss and have the regional coordination meetings is the way to address that.
That one, Alex. And Paige, I've got a question that's come through to you. When is round 2 funding for the LRF opening, and who will be eligible to apply?
I actually meant to say that to preempt that question, because I assume that would be everyone's number one. Unfortunately, I don't have a date right now that I can share. It is a bit caught up in the Queensland government budget processes, so we're waiting for those to play out a bit. We had a bit of an unusual year last year because of COVID. So in terms of eligibility, I think I would say our intention is not to change much from round 1, because we know there were a lot of people from round 1 that maybe either didn't get their applications ready in time because it was open for a fairly short period, and may have done some work towards that for round 2. So we will try to keep it as similar as we are able to in terms of eligibility criteria.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I just have a question as a facilitator, and I've been a patron for the National Indigenous Fire Sticks Alliance, and just last year we had a meeting where it was quite topical after the fires devastation on the East Coast last year. There was a lot of private landowners who were trying to get in contact with a lot of traditional owners with regards to assisting them with burning on their own country. Have you come across that during your time where you are now? Anyone?
Yeah, I'm aware of a couple of projects, not necessarily on the Cape, but in the local area where we are, where the private landowners are engaging Indigenous groups to conduct fire management activities on their properties. Yeah, it is happening.
Maybe to stay in the realm of carbon, since then the regulator has asked all the vegetation projects. So people using plantation projects or human-induced regeneration methodologies, I've asked all those projects that are the majority of carbon projects registered to have a fire management plan to make sure that the carbon that is stored through those trees and those bush regeneration is actually protected. And I see that as a massive opportunity for the kind of work that 5/6 is doing, right? To not use it directly to create carbon credits for a bunch of reasons. That's not easy, but definitely use it to protect some of the other carbon projects that are in there. We're seeing lots of interest around that in Southwest Queensland and Northwest New South Wales.
Great, thank you for that.
Also,
Julien.
Nova, there's
we've got a question here from Hannah Cliff. She says, where can we get more information about the methods being used to quantify the cultural benefits of fire management?
I guess I can take that one. Just on the last question though, yeah, there are other, actually, I just thought about some other particularly private conservation estates on the Cape, and they work with neighbouring Indigenous ranger groups, and the ranger groups come in and assist the private conservation estate with their fire management. So yeah, definitely happening. As far as the methods go, they're all listed, all the ways you can go about it are listed on the LRF website, and maybe Paige can talk more about that. But as far as Cape York NRM's LRF project, it will be up to the groups involved to decide which method they use, and we haven't got to that point in the project yet. But yeah, there's a number of ways to do it, and they're all listed on the LRF website.
Yeah, I'll just chime in to say, for us, so the process of verifying co-benefits, as it were, for the LRF, it does vary by the method being used, and in some cases, it's third-party assurance is required to sort of demonstrate those benefits, and that would include things like using Accounting for Nature or the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation's core benefit standard. And so, yeah, as Alex said, you can find out, again, referring back to the LRF co-benefit standard, which is the most technical document we have, but it's also probably the most important for understanding how to demonstrate and value these co-benefits.
Okay. I think that that wraps up your contribution today, and I'd like to thank you all for your presentations and your invaluable knowledge that you've been able to share with us today. So thank you for that.